There's an old saying, like an expression rarely deployed across the South, thank God for Mississippi or we'd be lost in everything. Donald 45 is now behind even Mississippi. Last week, Governor Tate Reeves signed into law a measure that will remove the Confederate battle flag from the state flag. It was the last time, it was the last state flag in the country to include the Confederate design, though the others retained references. The squatter, meanwhile, is still complaining about decisions to remove this flag. Um, in a Monday morning tweet, he attacked the black driver Bubba Wallace and bashed NASCAR's decision to ban the flag from races. This broadside followed a July 4th weekend in which 45 issued the customary appeals to a national unity and instead sought to divide the American people during speeches in South Dakota and Washington, D.C. Taken together, the speeches and 45's other remarks in other forums over the past week indicate that he is seeking to inflame a culture war ahead of the November election. There's nothing strange about 45 seeking to exploit racial and cultural tension to advance himself. It's the story of his career and certainly of his political career, yet the moment is also profoundly strange even with all that history in mind. A squatter who ran and won a campaign built on racial grievances is now losing support because voters have turned against him on his core issue. Rather than a just course, however, 45 is insisting on talking more about it and appears to have given up the idea of persuading voters altogether. This is the deep irony of 45. This is the deep irony of 45's re-election campaign. He captured the White House with a campaign based on racial backlash, and now, after nearly 4 years of racist remarks and appeals, backlash to the backlash may doom his campaign. It's difficult to think of a moment in recent history when Americans were more divided, either physically, thanks to the coronavirus pandemic, or politically. Independence Day is furthermore the easiest occasion for a squatter to appeal to national unity and warm feelings and to bask in that warm glow, yet 45 cannot or will not do that. At Mount Rushmore on Friday, 45 told a crowd, "Angry mobs are trying to tear down statues of our founders, deface our most sacred memorials, and unleash a wave of violent crime in our cities. Many of these people have no idea why they're doing this. Yeah, and we have no idea why you're fucking up the country instead of trying to save it. But somehow, some know exactly what they are doing. They think the American people are weak and soft and submissive, but no, the American people are strong and proud, and they would not allow our country and all of its values, history, and culture to be taken from them." In a Klan speech at the White House on Saturday, he struck a similar message. We are now in the process of defeating he calls them the radical left, the Marxist, the anarchist, the agitators, the looters, and people who, in many instances, have absolutely no clue what they are doing. We already know you have no clue on what you're doing. 45 has announced a strange and likely plan to build a national sculpture garden celebrating American heroes, and later yesterday he assailed two professional sports teams that are considering changing their names, while also delivering an ignorant attack on Senator Elizabeth Warren. And this is his exact tweet that he had tweeted out, and I'm surprised because when he calls Elizabeth Warren the racist term, that basically that they never take his tweets down. The names they name teams out of strength, not weakness. But now the Washington Redskins and Cleveland Indians, two fabled sports franchises, look like they are going to be changing their names in order to be politically correct. Indians like Elizabeth Warren must be very angry right now. That was his exact tweet. The common element across these statements is an appeal to an us versus them worldview. As 45 has demonstrated in the past, it's a usefully protein destination, or designation, basically. It's just vague enough to leave possibilities: race, ethnicity, cities versus rural areas, the deep state versus the people, Q adherents versus everyone else, and left versus right, and just specific enough to allow any number of groups to see themselves in it. What unites all these groups, ironically, is division. 45 is pitting some Americans against each other. Where he once said that there were very fine people on both sides, Esparta now sees right only on one side. Though 45 has long tended to view himself not as the squatter of the United States, but as the squatter of 45 voters, the imperative to broaden his base of inbred supporters is more urgent than ever. The squatter has pinned his re-election hopes on the enthusiasm of his fervent inbred supporters, but now his base is shrinking. A growing body of polling shows voters favoring Democrat Joe Biden in November. The base strategy always required 45 to walk a narrow path, and now that path is narrower now. Instead of taking steps to broaden his inbred support, however, the 45 team has already given up on winning anyone back. The Associated Press reported yesterday that his campaign is predicted on the belief that the few voters who don't like 45 can be persuaded to swing behind him now. So success lies in motivating those who are still with him. The plan: first, drive up negative opinions about Biden, one the 45 campaign believes is liked by perhaps 60% of the country, if tepidly. Secondly, on the theory that a largely unwavering 40% of the country likes the squatter, 45 would serve up policies and rhetoric to generate enough enthusiasm to turn out that slice of the country to vote. If this sounds familiar, it is because it's the playbook 45 ran on 4 years ago. He realized he didn't need to win a majority of the country, and indeed he did, and Hillary Clinton won the popular vote by nearly 3 million. But 45 was able to exploit negative views of Clinton, exacerbate them, and strategically suppress the vote enough to execute a clever joke of electoral college-focused strategy. 45 has been reliving the election for years. His upset victory remains a staple of his public comments and tweets, and it stands to some reason that he tried to use it again. It's early in this election campaign, though, that it feels like it's been going on forever, and 45 might still be able to pull off the same trick at that same moment. However, it's not working like it once did. While it's true that a lot of the media coverage made a Clinton victory seem like a foregone conclusion, there were warning signs of her weakness for some time, and Biden is already doing better on several of those fronts. The presumptive Democratic nominee holds a larger lead and a more consistent one, and he's eating into 45's edge in key demographics, including the white voters and the older voters. The reason for this, as I wrote last week, is that voters are horrified by 45's handling of the race issues and the protests and the coronavirus test. The squatter's unfavorability rating remains high, though with its normal range, and voters still give him high marks in the economy, which he doesn't deserve on that because he trashed the fucking economy. But there's been an immense shift in opinion on race. White voters have changed their minds, and they're no longer with the squatter, but he's sticking to the same talking points. In 2016, many skeptics believed, naively as it turned out, that a race-based campaign was a relic of the 60s and could no longer work. At the moment, it looks like a relic of the 2010s that may no longer work. 45's tweets about Bubba Wallace exemplifies that shift. In the fall of 2017, 45 began railing against the former quarterback Colin Kaepernick and effectively pitted himself against the NFL in the summer of 2020. 45 was once again demonizing a black athlete, but this time he's pitting himself against NASCAR, a far more conservative and smaller institution, and he's finding himself on the wrong side of the debate, with the sports leaders banning the flag and its drivers rallying around Wallace. As for 45's claims of a hoax, the FBI concluded that a noose reported in their garage was not meant to threaten Wallace, but it was certainly a noose. There's likely a tranche of voters who have been deeply moved by the protests after George Floyd's death, and who are upset about racial injustice, but who are also uncomfortable with the iconoclastic urge to tear down the statues. This is one group of people 45 has probably lost, but it could presumably regain, and on occasion he manages to pitch his argument in a way that might appeal to his inbred base. At Mount Rushmore, 45 said this: by tearing down Washington and Jefferson, these radicals would tear down the very heritage for which men gave their lives to win that Civil War. They would ease the memory that inspired those soldiers to go to their death, singing these words of the battle hymn of the Repug, as he died to make men holy, but let us die to make men free. While God is marching on, they would tear down the principles that were propelled. They would tear down the principles that propelled the abolition of slavery in America and ultimately around the world, ending an evil institution that had plagued humanity for thousands and thousands of years. This is bellicose by normal standards, but it's relatively restrained for 45, and it celebrates the Union victory in the Civil War. Notably, it's also a pre-written text for a normal speech. For a formal speech, anyway. When 45 takes the opportunity to go off script, to improvise, or to speak for himself, he almost invariably wades into more dangerous water and starts to lose those persuadable voters. He might threaten to veto funding for the military if it requires renaming bases to honor Confederate generals. He might call Black Lives Matter a symbol of hate, Or he might attack Bubba Wallace and celebrate the Confederate battle flag. This is not merely the lack of discipline 45 apologists sometimes describe to him, but the squatter is revealing his own essential urges. With his political fate on the line, he has made a choice to talk almost entirely about the things that voters dislike him most about. Speaking on the conservative commentator Brian Kilmeade's radio show yesterday, Senator Dumbass Lindsey Graham defended both NASCAR. He said, "I've lived in South Carolina all my life, and if you're in business, the Confederate flag is not a good way to grow your business." And Wallace, who he had, said had nothing to apologize for. "You saw the best in NASCAR," Graham said. "When there was a chance that it was a threat against Bubba Wallace, they all rallied to Bubba's side, so I would be looking to celebrate that kind of attitude more than being worried about it being a hoax. Expecting 45 to celebrate that kind of attitude at this point borders on delusional." As Graham's colleague Rick Scott, who's another dumbass of Florida, told the New York Times, "He is who he is. People know who he is. You think he's going to change?" Scott's right. There's never going to be a 45 pivot. 45 is the same as he always has been, and he's trying to use the same old strategy of an electorate that is desperate to move on.